Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and if I look a little different, I promise it is still actually Tori. I just got a haircut, so I'm feeling fresh and ready for summer, and I am so excited. And it is time to do my top 10 fantasy series ranked video. Top 10 videos have become the butt of a lot of jokes here on BookTube because everybody does top 10 videos and they do them all the time, and I totally get it. But one of the things I really like about top 10 videos for myself is that it is a really good gauge for me as a reader to go back and see where I've come from and what series have come in and out of that top 10. And as I read new series and add those to my pile of experience, I get to see how my tastes change throughout the years, which is pretty cool. So it's honestly as much of a metric point for me as a reader as it is to share with you guys out in the audience. This is a subjective list of things that I personally love and the way I personally rank these series, but I realize that yours would be very different. So I would love to know down in the comments below your top 10 fantasy series of all time and how would you rank them. My rules for this video are simple. The first one is that I have to have read at least 3 full books in the series. That series does not have to be completed. And also, I'm only going to be including 1 series per author in my ranked list. So, with that aside, let's get into it. Without further ado, let's start with number 10, and that is going to be Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne. This is a kind of Celtic-inspired fantasy quartet, and I binged this series so quickly when I read it. I could not stop, could not put it down. John Gwynne does a great job at creating a very lived-in world with fantastic characters, and his combat, especially his group combat scenes, are absolutely flawless. They are so well done. They're so well done. And I really, really loved this series. There's a few characters in here that really stole my heart as I went through the 4 books, and I just had a fantastic time with it. I highly recommend this series for anyone who is looking for a kind of good versus evil, lots of characters to choose from for your favorites, incredible combat, really cool Celtic mythology kind of woven into the world building, and it is an incredibly bingeable series. Book number 9 is a indie fantasy series that is currently ongoing, and this next book, the 4th book in the series, is coming out very shortly. And I'm so excited for it because I have absolutely been loving these characters. I love the genre blend of this world, and I'm getting ahead of myself because number 9 is the Riverfall Chronicles by Jacqueline Hagan. There are currently 3 books in the series, and I believe she has planned 7. Jack, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But I absolutely love this series. And why I love it so much is for several reasons. First of all, you have a very lovable, Artful Dodger style main character named Inkwell Featherfield. You have a lot of preconceived ideas in the society at large that are being challenged constantly throughout the book. You have floating villages, you have steampunk, you have kind of gas lamp Victoriana vibes. There's so much to love in this series. I think that Jacqueline has done some really cool things with genre blending, and it's so crazy to me that a gas lamp style fantasy feels so incredibly epic, and I love that she's taking those 2 subgenres and just mashing them together, and it is a thing of beauty. Number 8 on my list is the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. I read this, I think, 3 or 4 years ago now. It's been a little while, and this is currently the only series within Realm of the Elderlings that I have actually completed. I'm sure that one of the later series may supersede this at some point, but for now, Farseer trilogy is my completed representation of a Hobb series that I've read, and this is how to describe Robin Hobb's writing. She is so good at reaching into your emotions and just you're in her hand the entire time. The entire time you're reading the book, she tells an incredibly emotionally driven story. The characters are very nuanced. You have Fitz, who is a bastard son, who is our main character, and it's a little bit coming of age, especially in this first book, but the world expands so incredibly quickly. For me, where Robin Hobb really shines is that these characters, you don't even really realize how firmly embedded they've become inside your heart until you leave them for a while and then come back. And when I came back to the characters after an extended period of time after finishing Farseer and then moving on, it made me so emotional to see their names on a page again. And that is a wonderful sign for me as a character-driven reader that I've fallen in love with the characters. This story really invites you to sit down and savor it and just let Robin Hobb unfold more and more of the story as you work through the trilogy. Number 7 is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. Like so many other people in the community, Mistborn was my gateway into adult epic fantasy, and I am very grateful for that because it has changed my life being part of this genre, and I love it so much. And from this story, I kind of exploded into all of these different, very beloved series. I'm usually not one for a hard magic system, but when it comes to Mistborn, I really love this magic system. I find it really interesting. I love the way that Brandon Sanderson plays with it throughout the trilogy, and I love the characters. There are some phenomenal characters in this series. I love them so much. The first one of the trilogy is still my favorite, but there are things that I love about all 3 of them. This book has proven itself over and over again as a fantastic gateway, especially for people who haven't really explored much of the epic fantasy genre yet. It's very bingeable. There's a lot going on, but it's not difficult to follow. It's still a very accessible epic fantasy, and I think on this trilogy incredibly fondly a lot. So I am very happy to still include it on this list. It may surprise some of you that I chose Mistborn instead of the Stormlight Archive for Brandon Sanderson's place on this list, but honestly, I think Stormlight Archive would have probably been a little bit lower on the list, and also I don't know that it's had the same kind of impact on me that Mistborn Era 1 has. All right, moving on is a series that I read also very early on in my career of epic fantasy reading, and that is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin, coming in at the number 6 spot. Now this series I have so many conflicting opinions on, and I love it, and there's no doubt in my mind that this series has been influential to me as a reader and a writer. There are characters in this series that made me feel incredibly seen in fantasy. I've talked about Brienne of Tarth many times on my channel before, and I've read the whole series that's available right now, and the thing is, it's just so vast, right? Like, when you have a series like this, just the pure scope of it is so incredibly impressive. And I think that Martin writes some very, very nuanced characters, and it is kind of a gold standard of what grimdark fantasy can look like. This series has often been described as the fantasy equivalent of our own history's War of the Roses, and it is just a whole bunch of different houses battling it out over multiple continents, and everything is spiderwebbed and complex and layered, and there's so many characters. It's just huge. It's a massive scope series, and I think it very much deserves its place among fantasy royalty. All right, we are getting into the top 5 now, and in that 5 spot is going to be a series that I read last year that I am still thinking about and pondering and trying to figure out like how I feel about certain characters and certain events and things that happened, and that is Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. I've read all 3 of the trilogy books, and I've also read the novellas and short stories that go along with it, so I have read everything that exists in this world up to this point. And this is the series for me that kind of grabbed me. I was really excited about it and interested. I binged my way through the books, but I didn't really know how much of an impact it had left until after I'd finished it. And I'd sat with it for a couple of months, and all of a sudden I realized I was still here, and I was still thinking about it, and I was still analyzing the characters in my head. This series is a more modern fantasy take on kind of military slash mafia families' politics on an island called Kekon, where the magical property of jade allows certain people to have enhanced abilities. And one of the things that amazes me about Fonda Lee's writing is just her understanding of the scope of her world, the different characters, the politics, the sociology of all of the things going on in her series, and how she effortlessly jumps between the countries of this trilogy and knows so much about their inner workings. And it's so lived in, it's so detailed, and it is very heart-pounding. There's so many moments in here that threw me for a complete surprise. I'm still here, I'm still thinking about these characters, and I think this is a series that I will end up rereading multiple times in the future because I just cannot get enough of the world that Fonda Lee has created here. All right, in the number 4 spot is my favorite indie fantasy series of all time, and that is the Mortal Techniques by Rob J. Hayes, which begins with Never Die, then continues with Pawn's Gambit and Spirits of Vengeance. These books are standalones, technically speaking, but I still recommend that people start with book 1 and move on to the second and third books in that order, simply because there are through lines between the books and there are characters that cross over, kind of side characters, and there are especially Easter eggs in Pawn's Gambit and in Spirits of Vengeance that lead all the way back to some of the events in Never Die, and it's beautiful and I love it so much. This series is a wuxia-inspired fantasy about a motley crew of characters in each of the books who are fighting against creatures straight out of Japanese mythology and folklore. There are some incredible magical ability combat scenes in all of these books, and that is something that I think Rob J. Hayes writes incredibly well. They are very bingeable, they are very fast to read, the characters are so good. The characters are so good, you guys. There's a character arc in Never Die specifically that is one of my favorites that I've read in the last 4 years on BookTube. I love this series. I cannot wait to read more of it. I know that there are plans for another book in this series in the works, which makes me very excited because I can't wait to read it. But man, you guys, I loved Never Die, I loved Pawn's Gambit, and then I read Spirits of Vengeance and realized just how much I loved the series as a whole. I cannot recommend this highly enough, especially if you are somebody who grew up or love now anime, shonen anime especially, and you're looking for something to kind of scratch that itch in fantasy novels. This series will absolutely do that. It cuts out all of the filler type stuff that you find in shonen anime shows and gives you a pulse-pounding, motley crew, Japanese spirits-centered story, and it's just so good. It's so, so, so good. All right, guys, we are down to my top 3, and ranking these was actually harder than I thought it was gonna be. This whole list, this was a hard list to make. Like, top 10s are not easy, okay? I've thought about this for weeks before I finally decided on how the rankings would lay out. But with no further ado, number 3 on my list is The Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. And trying to explain this quartet is going to be very difficult for me because there's so many facets to this. I am holding up the omnibus edition, so as you can see, that is all 4 books in a single bind-up. And what's beautiful about that is that Long Price Quartet gives you an incredibly complex, character-driven, deep dive epic fantasy, but it's shorter. It's in bite-sized novels. So each of these books is only about 250, 300 pages, and it is one of the most intimate explorations of characters' choices over a lifetime, of what it looks like to hold responsibility and make decisions for a lot of people over a lifetime, and it's just brilliant. This is hands down the most underrated fantasy series that I have read thus far. I cannot believe that more people are not talking about this series. It is phenomenal. The character relationships are like nothing I've ever read in fantasy before. They're so nuanced. They're so well done. This magic system is so incredibly unique. Hands down the most unique magic system I think I've ever read in fantasy. And it centers around the power of language and certain people who've developed the ability to bring those ideas in language to life. And that's all I'm gonna say about it, because you really have to read it to experience how mind-blowing this series truly is. All right, we are up in my top 2, and I'm so excited, you guys. All of these series I love so much, but these top 2 have just been such incredibly influential series to me. And I'm sure if you've been around my channel for a while, nobody's going to be surprised by either of these, but I'm going to talk about them and gush about them anyway, because I can, because it's my channel. So, number 2 is the Gentleman Bastard series by Scott Lynch, which starts, of course, with the lies of Locke Lamora. This is one of those series where when Thorn of Emberlane, which is book 4, which we've been waiting for a while, comes out, I will drop everything on my TBR to read that book. This is the story of Locke Lamora and the motley crew of characters that join him in each of the 3 books that are currently available in this series. He is a ne'er-do-well orphan. Locke is raised by a very interesting old gentleman who happens to teach young people how to be exceptional con men. And Locke is a prized pupil in that area, and he masters the ability to create characters and to fool people and to steal things and all of this stuff. This is the absolute height of fantasy heist novels. It is so good. The world building is so good. The dialogue is so good. I really do not think, like, people always talk about this series and talk about the characters and how much they loved it, but I don't think Scott Lynch truly gets enough credit for how incredible of a world building and dialogue and character writer he is. This book is really good, you guys. Like, just from a writing standpoint, the world building alone is so fascinating, and I love it so much. It's so interesting and unique. And the dialogue between the characters is so snappy and so fresh and interesting and real. There are some just heart-rending moments in this book and the books that follow it. And I could not love it more, honestly. This is one of those books that's just makes my heart so happy every time I think about the characters, and I cannot wait to reread it very shortly. And of course, that leaves my top pick, which I'm sure is going to shock everyone who's ever been on my channel before, and that is Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. No series that I've ever read has had the impact on me as a reader and writer as Malazan Book of the Fallen has. The scope of this series is so vast in the histories that it contains, in the scope of the characters, the pantheon, the mythology, the combat, the races of peoples that populate this series. It's just like nothing I've ever read before. What's so beautiful about it is that Steven Erikson manages to create something that is just on a mind-blowingly epic scale in terms of the world, and yet tell it through such intimate character perspectives that it just, you cannot tear yourself away. There's so much here. There's just so much here. And each book really gives you a whole new perspective on the world he's created and the characters that are telling the story. I've read 4 books out of the 10 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. There is also a series that was written by Malazan's co-creator, Ian C. Eslamont, that goes alongside Malazan Book of the Fallen, and I'm really excited to finish my reread, finish the Malazan Book of the Fallen this year, and then move on to all of Ian C. Eslamont's work and the other things that Steven Erikson has written within this world, because there's just... When I read this series over 10 years ago, it blew my mind. It completely blew my mind. It changed the way that I look at fantasy. It changed the way that I approach writing fantasy, writing characters in fantasy. And I would be hard-pressed to find another series that has had as big of an impact on me as Malazan Book of the Fallen has. Now, the one thing I will say about this really quickly is that this series definitely gets a bad rap in the community very often. If you talk to people about series that they are intimidated by, you will usually find Malazan Book of the Fallen very high up on those lists. And I completely understand that. It is a commitment of a series to read, but I guarantee you, if you step in, you will be amazed. So I highly recommend anyone who's been a little afraid to start this series. I promise you, if I can read it and love it as much as I have, you absolutely can. Don't feel like you have to understand everything right away. Just let the characters lead you through the story and open your mind, because honestly, that, in my opinion, is the best way to go through this series. So that is my #1 fantasy series. Currently, I am so excited to keep reading fantasy, you guys. What makes me so excited about making a video like this is seeing the possibilities. I can't wait to see next year at this point how this list has changed, if at all, and 5 years down the road, how this list has changed, if at all. And I'm so excited to continue finding new incredible series that will stay with me forever. And again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I would love to know what your top 10 fantasy series of all time are. Drop those down in the comments below so that I can check it out. If you like this video, drop a like and a subscribe if you want to hang out around my little corner of the internet and talk fantasy books and a smattering of other things. And I really appreciate you watching. I hope you're having a great week. I hope you're reading 5-star reads, and I will see you in the next video.